The next time you shake cinnamon onto your oatmeal, stir it into your coffee, or dust it over French toast, pay attention, because inside your body, that single teaspoon can drop your blood sugar response to that meal by roughly 20%, measured 2 hours later. Not eventually, not after weeks of habit, in one meal. Cinnamon is one of the most consumed spices on the planet. It sits in almost every kitchen on Earth, and it may be one of the most misunderstood ingredients you own, because what happens inside your cells after you eat it looks nothing like what the label suggests. The bakery calls it a flavor, the biochemistry calls it a signaling molecule, and the version most Americans reach for from the grocery store isn't even the one the research is actually talking about. You've been told cinnamon is a flavor, a warming spice, something the bakery uses, something your grandmother added to apple pie because it made the kitchen smell like home. That's the story. It's also the reason nobody's paying attention. Meanwhile, the same compounds doing the work inside cinnamon are being extracted, capsuled, and sold back to you for $30 to $60 a month under the label blood sugar support. Walk down any supplement aisle. Half those bottles list cinnamon extract right on the panel. And here's what nobody says out loud. The whole spice, the actual ground bark sitting in your cabinet, often outperforms the isolated extract, because it delivers not one active compound, but a small stack of them, working together, exactly the way the plant assembled them. The label calls it seasoning. The biochemistry calls it a metabolic intervention. But there's a catch. One type of cinnamon does this cleanly. The other quietly does something else to your liver. And most people standing in the spice aisle can't tell the two apart. The first compound is cinnamaldehyde. It's the molecule that gives cinnamon its smell and its warmth on your tongue. It's also the compound most researchers point to when they talk about cinnamon and blood sugar. Here's what it appears to do. When you eat carbohydrates, your pancreas releases insulin. Insulin is the key that unlocks your cells so glucose can leave your bloodstream and get put to work. In a lot of modern bodies, that key doesn't turn as easily as it used to. The cells stop listening. Glucose lingers. Insulin spikes higher, trying to be heard. This is the earliest stage of insulin resistance, and most people carrying it have no idea. Cinnamaldehyde appears to make those cells listen again. Research suggests it acts on the insulin receptor itself, helping it phosphorylate more efficiently, meaning the signal telling your cells to open the door gets amplified. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2007 found that 6 grams of cinnamon consumed with a rice pudding meal significantly reduced the 2-hour postprandial glucose response and slowed gastric emptying, two mechanisms pulling in the same direction at the same time. Picture your bloodstream after a plate of pasta as a parking lot at closing time. Cars are circling. The gates are jammed. Insulin is the parking attendant waving cars through, but he's yelling into a broken microphone. Cinnamaldehyde doesn't add more attendance. It fixes the microphone. The symptom you would have felt if the system was struggling, that specific crash 45 minutes after a carb-heavy meal. The one where your eyelids get heavy and your focus disappears and you blame the meeting, or the weather, or a bad night's sleep. That was the parking lot backing up. And that was your body asking a question your spice rack already had part of the answer to. If this is catching you off guard the same way it caught me when I first read the research, take 1 second, hit like on this video, and subscribe. This channel exists to dig into the science nobody puts on the label. Now here's the part that surprises people even more. Cinnamon doesn't just amplify insulin signal. There's a second compound, a specific polyphenol called methyl hydroxychalcone polymer, or MHCP, along with a family of related molecules known as type A procyanidins, that appears to mimic insulin's action directly. Read that again. The compound doesn't just help insulin work. It behaves like insulin. Research led by Richard Anderson at the USDA's Beltsville Human Nutrition Research Center, published in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry in 2004, isolated these polymers from cinnamon and demonstrated insulin-like activity on fat cells in the lab. A separate 40-day clinical trial published in Diabetes Care in 2003 reported that daily cinnamon consumption in people with type 2 diabetes was associated with reductions in fasting glucose, triglycerides, LDL cholesterol, and total cholesterol, with some effects persisting after the intervention ended. And that last part matters, because this compound doesn't announce itself. You don't feel MHCP working, your triglycerides don't send a text message when they drop, your LDL doesn't post a status update when it edges down a few points. The work happens in the walls of your arteries, in the cellular arithmetic of what your liver decides to store versus release, in 1,000 small decisions your metabolism makes every hour that you never see the results of. Think of it like water pressure in an old house. A tiny leak behind the drywall doesn't announce itself either, but 2 years later the floor is warped and you're wondering how it got that bad. Metabolic damage runs on that clock. So does metabolic repair. What cinnamon is doing here doesn't show up on a Tuesday. It shows up on the blood panel 4 years from now. You chalk the fatigue up to age, the rising fasting number up to stress, the stubborn belly fat up to bad genetics. Some of it is a slow leak you had the patch for the whole time. The person most at risk here isn't the person avoiding cinnamon, it's the person eating it every single day and getting almost none of the benefit because they're eating the wrong form, the wrong dose, or pairing it in a way that cancels the effect. Picture the person dusting a whisper onto their morning coffee foam and calling it wellness. The dose is homeopathic, the compound barely registers. Meanwhile, they're spending $60 a month on a glucose support supplement whose active ingredient is sitting in their spice rack, being used as decoration. Now picture the opposite person, dumping cinnamon into everything, from the wrong jar, day after day, for years, getting the metabolic benefit and also getting something else, something the liver has to file paperwork for. It wasn't seasoning, it was signaling, and most people are getting the signal wrong. So what do you actually do with this? First, know which cinnamon you're buying. The cinnamon in almost every standard American grocery store is cassia, usually Chinese or Indonesian. It's cheap, it's dark, and it contains a compound called coumarin that your liver has to process. The European Food Safety Authority has set a tolerable daily intake of roughly 0.1 milligrams of coumarin per kilogram of body weight, and a single teaspoon of cassia can push a smaller adult right up to or past that limit. The alternative is Ceylon cinnamon, sometimes labeled true cinnamon, grown mostly in Sri Lanka, lighter in color, with a delicate, flakier stick that crumbles when you press it. It contains a small fraction of the coumarin. If you're using cinnamon daily, this is the one you want. Second, respect the dose. The research showing meaningful glucose effects generally lands between 1 and 6 grams per day, roughly half a teaspoon to 2 teaspoons. A dusting on foam is aroma. Half a teaspoon on your oatmeal is a mechanism. Third, pair it with the meal, not the empty stomach. Cinnamon's postprandial effect is exactly that, postprandial, after eating. Sprinkle it on the oatmeal, stir it into the yogurt, add it to the rice, blend it into the smoothie with the fruit. That's where the mechanism lives. Taking it fasted, by itself, is missing the moment it was built for. Fourth, rotate and don't stack. If you're already taking a blood sugar affecting medication or a supplement doing the same job, layering daily high-dose cinnamon on top isn't a bonus. It's a compounding effect your doctor needs to know about before your next lab draw. You're not someone who just sprinkles cinnamon on things anymore. You're someone who understands that cinnamaldehyde is retuning the insulin signal inside your cells, that MHCP and the type A procyanidins are running a quiet, cumulative program on your triglycerides and your fasting glucose, and that the difference between Ceylon and cassia is the difference between using this spice as medicine and using it as a slow tax on your liver. You know what the label doesn't say. You know what the dose actually needs to be. You know what to look for on the jar. There's another everyday ingredient sitting in almost every kitchen right now, in a jar you probably opened this week, doing something to your blood pressure and your gut lining that nobody put on the packaging. In the next video, we're going to pull it apart compound by compound, and by the end, you won't look at your pantry the same way.